Hey, thank you so much for watching Shots with Katherine. I am so excited to be starting this new series of interviews with fellow cinematographers and filmmakers. Today, I'm super excited to welcome fellow cinematographer, production company owner, and all-around badass Natalie Perez. Natalie, thank you so much for joining me today. Could you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your journey as a DP?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Natalie Perez. I am an LA-based cinematographer, and this is crazy. I've been doing cinematography now for about 10 years, which is insane to think about. When I was younger, I loved photography, and when I got into high school, I loved psychology, but I was always raised with the idea that filming and photography was just a hobby. So I didn't even consider it at all. I actually loved psychology, but got terrible grades in it. So therefore, when I went to college, I went in undecided and was kind of thinking maybe I'll study English or communications. But my college, I went to Loyola Marymount University, and they ended up having like one of the best film schools in the nation. And so that was really awesome because I didn't know anything about film. I didn't even know filmmaking was a career, but yet I saw all these kids running around with cameras and, storytelling and stuff. And we had a TV station. So I was like, that looks kind of cool. I think I'll check it out. And I worked for free for the school's TV station for like a year and learned how to edit. And it was like a game changer for me. I was like, this is so much fun. I can't believe people do this for a living. And of course, my mom and dad were like, we recommend you do business. But I was like, there's no way. And then it wasn't until my junior year that I realized I took my first cinematography class and realized how much I loved it. And it was the perfect blend of like moving photography and psychology, which is what I realized I had always loved. And so it was really cool to be in this career where you can visually design stuff, but also have such a psychological impact. Every color you use, every angle, every movement has like a subtle psychological feature about it. And it blows my mind that this is a career, and here I am. I am a cinematographer first and foremost, but 2 years ago I started a production company called SheTV Media with a good friend of mine, Meredith Yinger. And her and I met in college, and she's more of like a director, producer, and host, and has done a little bit of acting as well. And then I'm more of like the technical girl. I know how to edit, I shoot, I can gaff, and together we're a two-woman team. For the longest time, I did not want to be a producer. It took a long time for me to accept being a producer, but one of the greatest things is that I get to help create from the beginning the things that I shoot. Over the last 2 years, I've shot everything we've produced, which is the superhero project we're working on now. And we also finished a kind of like a risque comedy drama, which is called The Madams. It's about two sisters who start an underground escort business together. Mainly, like, over the last 2 years, it's been a lot of web series. So, like, the Superheroes web series, Madam's web series, and I have another show called The Walkers, which is a web series, which will be premiering soon as well. I also love balancing my narrative work with my documentary work. And so I'm in the middle of a giant documentary, which is my baby. It's called Scars Unseen. It's about triumph of the human spirit, following 6 men and women who have overcome domestic violence. And we actually just released the trailer for that. So that one is live.
Be sure to check it out. Trailer is in the description. Film and photography and psychology is such an interesting mix. What I really want to get into, with this vlog and in general, is the creative process, because it's all about visual storytelling. You have to do that effectively as a cinematographer. It's not about tech and gear and lights. It's about the eye behind the camera. How has your experience with studying psychology, how has that played into how you shoot or your style or how you approach films?
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, I don't think I've ever been asked that before.
Awesome. First time for everything.
I know. For me, I'm like an empath. I love studying how people react in certain ways and how people interact with one another. And I think that was really what intrigued me about psychology, was understanding these little tricks to kind of help myself understand what people are really going through or what people are really thinking. And I live that on a daily basis in all of my interactions with everyone I meet. And so it was really cool when I started doing cinematography. After a while, it's like you realize there's certain angles that you prefer, or even if going into the equipment too, there's certain pieces of equipment that you prefer, like a lens choice or stuff like that. It's not because of the piece of equipment per se, but it's what it does to the story. Right. And I really realized that like I see life very differently than other cinematographers, and other cinematographers see life very differently than I see life. It's almost like acting in a way. Like acting, you're reacting, you're embodying someone else's personality. And I feel like it's similar with cinematography. Like, how would I view this situation if I was in this situation?
Oh, that's such a great way of looking at it. I love that. That relates to part of my process too, because the way I shoot things sometimes is almost method acting, but in a DP sort of way, like trying to dive into the world. And so for me, like listening to music or watching other films or just doing these little things to kind of get into the mindset.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't thought about that method acting, but it's so true. Like I remember there was one time I had a good friend and she created a series and she wanted it to be like The Office or like Parks and Rec. And so I like binge watched all of Parks and Rec so that I could understand comedic timing in zooms and in camera movements. And that was so fun and crazy because I felt like for months after that, I was just like seeing my life in zooms. I would look over and like my eyes would zoom in on something like that was going on. And it's crazy. It is like acting.
That's awesome. And then that kind of transitions into another question of, on that similar note, when you get a new project, what do you do to dive into that world? How does your creative process start?
One of the cool things is it's different with every project. I definitely am a team player. I love collaborative projects way more than if there was a director. And I know some DPs work better like this, but if there's a director who's like, here's the story, I don't care, shoot it however you want. That's cool, but I prefer to like help make other people's visions come true too. You know, when I get a script, I'll sit down with like the director and any other of the key people, like whether the writer is different from the director, and just kind of discuss with them really what they're going for in each scene, what are the top scenes, and what's like the tone behind what's said. And of course, we'll go over if there's any, you know, visual inspirations for them, if there's any movies or TV shows or shorts that they really like the look of that they want to implement into this short. I especially love that. Like right now I'm working on, not right now, but we started shooting before the quarantine and then we will be finishing shooting after. It's like a superhero romantic comedy film.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. So that's been really cool because the director was like, I don't want this to be like a Marvel movie. Yeah, it's going to have tones of that when she like gets into character and she becomes her superhero self. She's like, but really, I want this to be like Fleabag. I want this to be like a super dark comedy rom-com with superhero aspects. So it was really cool to kind of like sit down and talk with her and think, okay, how are we going to do this? Like, how can we mix those two genres together and kind of find something that works for this? It's really just sit down with the director, talk for hours, watch videos together, really get to know each other and get to know what we want to get out of this project, and then doing my research. And I love storyboarding. So I storyboard pretty like everything, and you know, shot listing, I do it all. But then at the same time, I'm super flexible when we get on set. I know that things, we just throw them out the window and do whatever we feel is right at the moment. So it's kind of fun and at times frustrating knowing that like we're doing all of this work and it could just change the minute we get on set.
That totally makes sense. But I mean, in a way, you could also say that it's not all for nothing, because then even if things do go out the window, with all this prep, with all this time that you've spent getting into that headspace, you know, watching videos, talking through the script, through the story, that's preparing you for those happy accidents where you throw everything out the window and do something totally different.
Yeah.
Any stories about that where maybe you were going into a shoot and you had one plan or one idea and then you just threw that totally out the window?
The most recent one I can think of is for this superhero movie. We had so much content. It was basically like 2 full episodes of this web series that we were filming in 2 days. And we surprisingly got through everything, but it was really, it was a lot. And there was one super long scene it was one scene, but really it was like 3 or 4 scenes, because the scenes were like, oh, 2 people talk here and then a third person enters and that becomes a scene, and then that one person leaves, so then they move and it's another scene, and then they walk towards the door and then there's a scene there. So it was a lot of different like camera setups, and we didn't have like a steady cam to like walk us through the whole scene. And so we obviously had planned for it in storyboarding and shot listing, but when we got there and saw how the actors moved and everything, we just literally I was like, well, screw the storyboard, like we're gonna start from the ground up. And I mean, it was fun because we were all kind of like, all right, like game time, how are we gonna do this? And so I love moments like that, but it was quite stressful.
I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, anytime you have to just sort of wing something or throw out your plan, definitely stressful. Going back to developing the world of the story, would you say, is there somewhere that your mind sort of automatically gravitates to for starting? I know for me, whenever I start to build visuals, I think color is usually the first thing that starts to come to mind. And so for you, is it, colors or angles? I mean, I guess when it comes to concrete visualizations, where does your mind go first?
Definitely, I would say angles and movement, which is really interesting because I never thought of that. But I do like think of color last. And I usually like to get like a production designer or someone involved to be like, what can we do? Like, do we have possibilities to go all out or not? I love movement. One of the first pieces of gear that I got was a glide cam. It was probably 7 years ago. And it's the greatest thing I've ever gotten. I definitely love the ability to move freely around in action. And I think it also helps us to like stay in the scene as well if there's a bunch of movement. So
right, that makes sense, because I feel like that's how we see naturally, because even if you're sitting still, your eyes are kind of going all over the place. So would you say when it comes to your style, I mean, of course it's always going to change depending on the look and feel that you're going for a certain project, but is there any elements of your style or that you would say tend to show up in every project? So like maybe movement, for example, or anything else?
I would probably say movement. I do work on, I would say, mostly comedies. I love like visual comedy too, which is kind of movement, how actors can be in a frame and it can be funny. I'm just fascinated by that, and I love comedy. So
I love watching comedy, but funny enough, it's probably the genre that I've shot the least. I think I've shot more like drama, horror. Can you talk a little bit more about shooting comedy and how do you get into the mindset? Because comedy is so different. There's so many different styles. Comedy can be just about every genre. So I'd love to hear more about that.
I love that. And it is really cool how we're all different. For me, I'm like so terrified of horror. So I've shot one horror film and I was like scared the entire time. So I was like, I can't do this for a living. With comedy, I kind of feel like in another life, maybe I was a comedian. I just like see life in a very funny way. I see my experiences in like everyday life, mostly with humor. And so I feel like that definitely helps when I'm doing comedies, because I'll think of like, okay, what's the funniest way I can present this situation? And it obviously helps because usually the scripts are comedy based, so they're already funny, and it's just figuring out like what's like maybe an added visual gag that we can do for this.
So going back to the psychology thing, how does that tie into comedy, or do you feel like that impacts how you're looking at comedies, or how you're shooting them?
This is a good question as well. Yes, my first answer is yes. I think it definitely, everything like is interrelated. All of your experiences go into your art. I think a lot of humor that I find funny is like awkward human interactions or like miscommunications. So, when someone goes for a high five and the other person doesn't see, and then that person has to be like, what am I going to do? Am I just going to ignore it, or am I going to wait? Like stuff like that, I think is like really funny, and I've obviously been in 1,000 of those situations. And there's two different types of comedy movies too. There's those movies which I think are like really funny, but you only have to watch them once, and that's because the dialogue is so funny. It's just like maybe two people talking and a 3-camera setup. It's about the dialogue, and it's the quickness of their dialogue, and like that's cool. And I don't do a whole lot of that comedy because it's funny, but it's nothing that I bring to the table.
So visually based comedy, like you said, it's kind of like Parks and Rec, The Office, where the camera really plays a big role in it.
Yeah, exactly.